Welcome in to the Where You're Going podcast. I'm your host, John Little. Thank you so much for being here. We believe at this podcast, it's not about where you've been. It's not about where you are right now. It's about where you're going and who you're becoming. And we just want to help you remember that every single time you tune into the show. And one of my great experiences in getting ready to launch this podcast was meeting Mark Alewine. He is a pastor, has been for 4 decades of his life. But I think most notably right now, he records a lot of music. So he has a lot of things to say about what it takes to record great music or to write a great song, which is very interesting to me. But I think most importantly, he knows a lot about and has wisdom about what it takes to be successful in our everyday walk. And a lot of it comes back to, for him, being part of community, being part of a pack mentality. So I hope you take that out of this conversation today with my friend, Mark Alewine. And I'm so pleased to be joined by my friend, Mark Alewine. Thank you so much for being part of the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying my name the correct way. I get it pronounced all kind of different ways.
I've been practicing this whole time, and I was able to nail it. So the rest of the interview is going to go just so well. And it's a full circle moment because before this podcast even launched, you had me on your show, and it meant a lot to me. So thank you so much for taking an interest in what we're doing here at the Where You're Going podcast. That means a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we met up in the Nashville area a few months ago now. We were at a Christian entrepreneurs conference, and hey, I'm not going to tell the story. And you find it very funny. Okay, I'm going to tell the story. You find it very funny that you wanted to call out to me because I had asked a question in front of the audience, and you were like, hey, that guy looks interesting. I'm going to talk to him because I think I said something about being a singer. And obviously that's what you do. And you asked your wife what my name was, and she said David.
David.
So,
David.
So you called out, hey, David.
I came running. I came running, and I said, David. And I'm running, and I said, David. And I know you can hear me, David.
Enough.
Then you turned back to me, and I looked at you, actually. And I said, I looked back. You looked back at me. I said, your name's not David, is it? You go, no.
And hopefully I was nice. I did tell you my name. You know, it wasn't like I withheld that information simply because it was misappropriated at first.
I just thought it was hilarious. And my wife usually has those things spot on. I said, what's that guy's name? She goes, I think it's David. And
hey,
so I said,
like
okay. Yeah, so we had the break, we're just on a break, and I go running for you. Well, anyway, the rest is history. That's how we met. We got to talking, and I was actually down in Nashville. So for me, it's down there because I'm up in Minnesota. We had gone from Minnesota to the Franklin area for Dan Miller's 48 Days Eagles Conference that was tagged on to the Christian Entrepreneurs Conference. And so you and I actually met at that conference. Yeah, and here we are today.
And I have had just a great time getting to know you and learning about what you're passionate about. And today you get to host this podcast, which we'll get to a second, and write all sorts of music and lead worship all over the nation. And what does life look like for you right now?
Well, so for 40 plus years, I was a worship leader or a worship pastor, full-time, part-time, all those years. And in 2020, Easter Sunday of 2020, I retired from the worship pastor role. I really don't like to use the word retired, but that's what most everybody knows. So I use it. But I for a lot of people, John, retirement is doing whatever you want and never working again. And that's not who I am. I've got a lot to give. I've got a lot of experiences over my lifetime. More importantly than that is I'm finding that even in this part of my life, I've got so much to learn. And so I'm learning so much just even about the studio here where I I was on a songwriting session today before this call, and Kathy and I wrote a complete song. And so we've written it. I got done with it with that session, and then I put some music to it. And I haven't done the demo yet, but I'll do the demo later on this evening for that particular thing. But right now, life looks a lot like songwriting sessions and song producing sessions. So you'll hear me use the word we, my wife is my business partner with Mark Alewine Music. And just so everybody knows, the name Alewine, I'm a little hesitant to say it like this, but it's the two alcoholic beverages together, ale and wine. And that's how most everybody would be able to spell it. But you put a "l" in there. So it's ale wine with a "l", Alewine. And so it's Mark Alewine Music. And under the Mark Alewine Music, we've got the music portion of things. And then we've got the podcast, Grit and Glory Songs and Stories. And then we've got the Pack Life men's mastermind that I've got going there. So life today with music and all those things together is very busy, but I'm working on getting rid of the busy part of my life and getting to the productive part of my life. And I think busy and productive aren't the same thing.
No, they're
And
not. What have you learned about that?
I've learned that, I could move all the stuff from this side of my desk over to this side of my desk, and then I could move them all back, and that would be busy work.
Right.
And the productive side of things would be learning how to use this audio interface, learning how to use this microphone, learning how to use this iMac that I'm looking at you on right now, and learn how to get music to the world, and more importantly, learning about life from other people and how they're handling things in their lives right now. And I like to be available for people as well, to a certain point. You gotta have some boundaries, but I like to be available at this point in my life where I can call my own schedule and I can say, sure, yeah, we can talk. Let's go have coffee. I had coffee with a brother this morning at 7 a.m. And 7 a.m. is not early, so I'm not whining. I'm up at 6 o'clock every day, except Sundays that I'm on the worship team, and then I'm up at 4:30. And so 6 o'clock every day. And so life starts there. We are doing some traveling. We just got back from Sarasota for some business with the 48 Days Eagles that I was mentioning earlier. And then we spent some time on the ocean at a friend's house, and that was awesome. But now we're back here, back at it, writing music, making connections, and sharing life with people.
Have you always been a people person?
Well, so I'm going to answer that this way. My dad was 20 years in the military, in the Air Force. My dad passed away a year ago, May. I was by his side when he passed away. It was an honor to do that. I can talk about it today. It was hard for me to talk about it last year, but I knew the joy of the Lord even at my dad's deathbed. And I knew the presence of the Lord there, and that was really wonderful. Dad was in the military. He loved the Air Force. We traveled the world, traveled a lot between inside Ohio, from north to south and places in between, and the state of Georgia. And I lived in Japan for 5 years, and the first 5 years of my life, as a matter of fact. So that was home to me. But I was always the new kid. I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but whenever I went to a school, I was always the new kid. And back then, the way they did the new kid was, hey, bring the new kid up front. Hey, everybody, this is Mark. And I'm holding my books like this, and I'm holding my back, and I just don't want to be there. And then it seemed like 3 to 4 months later, I did it again. I went to like 8 different schools before high school. And so I was always the new kid. And so that was tough. But I think a lot of that shaped my perspective with people, even though I didn't care for that. When I look back on that, that was hard. I believe it's given me the ability to talk to people. So now I go out with my grandkids. We were out last summer with our grandkids camping in our camper. And we were in the woods walking, and there was this couple there sitting at a bench in the woods. It was really a beautiful place. And I just stopped, started talking to them. two other people came up, and I said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" Just talking. The next thing you know, we got this conversation going on with four other people. Then this other couple starts walking up, and the grandkids are sitting there looking at me and looking at all these people. And I say, "Hey, you guys really can't come by here unless we know your names." Something to that effect. And so we started talking with them. Get done with that conversation. It was, granted, it was probably about 20 minutes. We stopped right there. And then one of my grandkids, I can't remember which one, looked up at me. They called me Pops. They looked up at me and said, "Pops, do you know everybody?" Well, part of that is that I don't have a problem talking to people, John. I don't have a problem with that. I met a guy this morning at coffee and started talking with him, gave him a card. I like to find ways to bring Jesus into the conversation without forcing anything on anybody. I like to find ways to bring Jesus into the conversation. I was able to do that this morning. It was really easy to do. So I don't have a problem talking with people. I like talking with people. I like meeting people an awful lot.
Sounds like it. And it sounds like once you finally were able to kind of put roots down somewhere, it was finally safe to do that, finally safe to get to know people, maybe.
Yeah, so I was born in Savannah, Georgia, and we started moving. So 6 weeks later, moved to Japan, and that's where I say the first 5 years of my life came back when I was 5 years old, I think. But we bounced around. My dad was in the Air Force at 18 years old, so he was retired at 38 years old. Now think about that. Retired military at 38 years old. And he said, right up to the day he died, he said, if the Air Force would let me back in, I'd go back in a heartbeat. He loved that military. But the reason he retired is he wanted me to be able to go to one school all 4 years. If he didn't retire then we were moving to Germany. And so we moved back to Georgia, where all of our family is, all of our relatives outside of my kids and my grandkids and my mom, who lives 2 miles up the road here. The rest of our family is down in Georgia, South Carolina, that area. And so I was able to go to high school all 4 years at one school, and I thrived there. And then I went to the mountains of Northeast Georgia. I'm actually right in the foothills of the mountains where I'm from. And I went to the mountains of Northeast Georgia and then on to the University of Georgia. And then from there, I got married, and my wife and I moved up here to Minnesota.
So, Mark, you write and just churn out a ton of songs. When did you start getting a passion for songwriting?
A friend of my mom and dad's, when I was in the 7th grade, we lived in the Cincinnati area, and he was going through a tough time. He brought his guitar over, and he was singing a sad song of some sort. And he might have been a little bit inebriated. And he was singing a sad song. Well, he ended up leaving that guitar there at the house. And it stayed there for 3 or 4 months. And he never came back to pick it up. Now, it was, I wish I had the guitar today. I really do. I wish I could say this was my first guitar. I'm sad I don't have it. It was an old Barclay. I don't know if Barclay is even in existence to this day, but I really called it a boat paddle with strings on it. It had a big crack in the body, and the action on the neck was like this. It was real high, and the strings were heavy gauge strings, and I don't think I ever changed those strings. So I just started picking it up, and at the time, John Denver was all the rage, and so I started. His stuff is pretty easy to play, to be honest with you. So even as a new kid, I learned 3 or 4 chords, and then I could start playing his songs. Now I'm not saying it just happened overnight. I got calluses because those were crummy strings and high action and really, really hard. I got nice guitars now. I've got that one there, which is a Taylor, and I'm a Taylor guy to this day. But I started playing John Denver music with that, and then somehow, my sophomore year, my mom and dad bought me my first real guitar. So some 4 or 5 years later, they bought me an Epiphone FT550. I remember it very well. My first real guitar, and then I started playing. Then I got saved in high school. Football camp, as a matter of fact, and a strange circumstance there. But I remember writing my very first song and playing it for the pastor's daughter, who was a good friend of mine. And she went back and told Daddy. And Daddy called me up. We didn't have cell phones back then, so he called me on the house phone. Said, Mark, I understand you've got a new song. I'd like you to sing it on Sunday. I don't know what day it was, but it was that week.
Yeah.
And I stammered and said, okay. I did reluctantly. And it was one of the most frightening things I've ever done. But I did it. Everybody's got to have a first of something. Just like first time you did a podcast, first time you got in front of a camera, first time, I sang the national anthem for a Twins game. You've sung the national anthem numbers of times for all these big games and those kinds of things. The first time we ever did those things, I was nervous. First time I got up in front of a church was when I was a junior in high school to sing the song that I wrote. But I had to have the words for it. We didn't have iPads and those things. So I scribbled out all the words, and I put it all up there. And I was able to sing that song, and that's how it got started. And that's how music became part of my life. My choir teacher in high school was amazing. Her name is Beth. She saw something in me and made me her assistant choir director. Now, you have no idea how bad I was. I didn't know any musical stuff other than how to play guitar at that particular point. That's all I knew. I honestly, I don't even know if I knew the key signatures and those things. I just would play. And she made me assistant choir director. Yeah, that was embarrassing. I didn't even know what I was doing.
Embarrassing.
I didn't know
thought
what
you were going to say. I was honored.
I was honored. I was embarrassed. But it was an honorable. I mean, it was an honoring thing that she did for me because it really launched me. And then she had a huge impact. I sang in a quartet, and we actually won state under her direction. And so music has just been ingrained in me. Then I went on to Truett McConnell University in the mountains of Georgia and studied music there, and then on to the University of Georgia. And then I got my degree up here in Minnesota in theology and missions. And I've been full-time and part-time at a church. My wife has never not known me in that role until I retired in 2020. We've been married 42 years. So even before we were married, she knew me in that role.
So what's the secret of songwriting?
Listening and writing a lot. I was in on one of Dan Miller's 48 days events on a Monday. I get the Monday and Tuesday calls mixed up. Monday, 2:00, and I was invited to be a guest on with John Sanders and to talk about some life that we had done together. And Dan asked me, he said questions similar to what you just asked me. And I said, well, I listen, I observe, and then I go and I write about it. And I said, there'll probably be a song that'll come from this experience. And a week later, I had written the song that the Eagles, 48 Days Eagles, use as the theme song now, called Fly with the Eagles. Not fly like an eagle, but fly with the Eagles. And we use that as our theme song now. So the secret, I think, is listening and realizing, too, that co-writing is probably the biggest thing that we can do in life. Not just in songs, but co-writing life together is very, very important when people don't try to go life alone. So co-writing really, really opens up a world of new experiences when you're writing songs. Very few songs that we hear, that we know, are written by one person. They might have the artist's name on it. Matthew West might be the singer on that, and he might say, here's my new song. But if you look on that, there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 other people that had written that song with him.
What's the value in getting another pair of ears on it or more insight? Because don't you just want to control everything and, just make it exactly Mark's song?
and you still can, even as everybody that has their name on that can release their own version of that song. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be one version. So sometimes people don't agree, but the idea that you can write these things together, and we, as we learn, I mean, I've been around some some pretty big name songwriters under their tutelage, and they say it has to be what's best for the song, not what's best for the person. And somebody has to kind of lead the way in this particular writing session. Not necessarily hold the trump card for everything. That person's role is you got to carry that role pretty carefully as kind of the lead. But everybody's voice matters, and if you do it right, it'll always feel like we wrote that song. It'll never feel like, well, I was there, but Mark wrote that song, or I was there, but John wrote that song, because we all contributed. And boy, to get people's insight, it's just, and there was that part of me for so many years, John. I wrote all my own songs.
Mm-hmm.
Said, why don't you co-write with somebody? Well, I don't really want to. Kind of what you just said there. I don't really want to. I don't want to give up that control. And then I was talking to a guy named Seth Mosley, who's a giant down in Nashville. Talking with Paul Balash. I've written some songs with Paul. And they said, you guys, we all co-write. We all do. We might write a song by ourselves once in a while, and I might put it out on a video on social media. But very few of us will ever release a song that's just our own. It does happen, but 95+%, maybe more, all are co-written, and the value in that is just unbelievable. Plus the relationships that you develop, and you find that you're really tied in. I write with one guy. His name is Justin White, out in the Portland area. He's a young guy, 30-ish, 31 years old, somewhere in there. Just got married. He's an amazing guy, an amazing musician, and an amazing songwriter. And he and I have written lots of songs. Matter of fact, the most recent song is called Choose Jesus, and it just came out last Friday. And he and I wrote that one together. The one before that, 7 or 8 weeks before that, was also written by me and Justin. And that one was called I'll Start With You. And so he and I really click. We can sit down, we can write a song in an hour and actually have a really good song, and then we'll rewrite it in the next day or two, because the real write is the rewrite in the music business. You always want to make sure that what you're writing is truthful and not just fluffy. So you might want to look at it first and then rewrite it over the next day or so, just tweak it a little here and there. And Justin and I really write well together. So the experiences of Justin mixed with the experiences of Mark makes a pretty sweet relationship when it comes to writing.
There's definitely a lesson to be learned from all this, that we are better together, that community is so important. And then, even giving up control and wanting to do things all by ourselves, especially in the world we live in today, which can be so isolating. Collaboration is an awesome thing. It's a tool that if you don't use it in whatever field you're in, you're probably missing out on some genius.
There is no question about that. We call it co-writing life together. And so we sit down and we can learn from experiences. So I can learn from John's experience, and John can learn from Mark's experience. And as long as we're open and amenable to ideas and thoughts, and sometimes a harder conversation if need be, if we open ourselves up. I've been part of an accountability group before accountability groups were a thing. Since 1991, I've been part of this. And we just met yesterday. We meet every month. When we were over at Bethany together, we met virtually every week, and then we all moved from there. Some of us are further away, so they can't be part of our group, but there's 4 of us that are still together that have been meeting, and we've been doing life together, co-writing life together. We come in, we're accountable for our actions, we call each other out on things, and we've called each other out. And but we do it in such a fashion that everybody can relate to the struggles, and everybody's got insight, and we really have no excuses, because these are 3 guys that I'm part of. I'm the 4th guy, of course. I can call these 3 guys at any time of day or night if I'm struggling with anything. And if I come back and say, well, I messed up in this area, or I did that, why didn't you call? Why didn't you call? there's three of us. So if you can't get one, try the other. And it's there really is no excuse when we're co-writing life together. And we're better men because of each other. That makes me a better husband. That makes me a better daddy. That makes me a better grandfather. Makes me a better musician. Makes me a better Jesus lover and Jesus representative. And so I'm better when I've got other people in my life.
There's some people that are nodding along right now and saying, absolutely, that's how I've experienced life, and I wouldn't be able to get through it without, other people around me. And I'm certainly one of those people. There are other people that know that may be the case, but they just don't feel like they can, take that next step to get out there. And then there's probably a third group that are like, no, I don't trust nobody. In any case, I'll just continue to do my own thing. But when people get it, when people understand the impact community can have on their lives, they don't ever go back. I mean, it is amazing what kind of impact community can have. So I guess if somebody's having trouble taking that first step, and like you said, vulnerability eventually is key to have some life change in community. But even before the vulnerability happens, just that step to find a community group, what would be that first step? How do people just dip their toe out there and get into it?
So I'm going to use Dan Miller again as my example for this conversation. We were, I believe it was that same time that you and I met. It was the Eagles event that happened just before the Christian Entrepreneurs Conference, the day before. And Dan was talking about the 3 a.m. list.
Yeah.
Who is on your 3 a.m. list? Now, 3 a.m. list isn't, hey, let me run this song by you, John. I'm sorry to wake you, but do you mind listening to this song? No, that's a 6 p.m. call. That's not a 3 a.m.
Right.
call. So you have to define what the 3 a.m. is. 3 a.m. is, I'm in trouble. I need some help. I need some serious help. Who's on your list? And Dan said, think of your age and divide that in half, and that's how many people you should have.
Ooh.
That's a huge number. I don't care how old you are. I'm 64. That's 32 people.
That is a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
For me, it's 20 and a half people. So
yeah. So when you think about it, you just have to think who's really on that list. By the way, I should be on your 3 a.m. list because I just want you to know that I'm your friend, and I'll answer the phone if you call. If it rings, I'll answer the phone. But it's one of these things where you have to find those people. Well, that means you've got to start diving into relationships a little bit more, and that's the trickier part of life. A lot of people, they go to work, whatever their work is, and then when they get done, they want to slam that door, get in their car, go home, and they just want to be alone.
Yeah.
And I understand that too. I understand that. But we're so much more vulnerable with life when we don't dive in. Now, I think a lot of people don't trust other people. And then I would say, are you the kind of person that you would trust, that you're looking for?
Yes.
So if you're not, then you need to change that part of your life. So our accountability guys, we meet, everything that happens at that table stays right at that table. And the things that we talk about stay right there. We don't take them beyond that. I used to be the director of our Celebrate Recovery program at our church. When we break off into groups, men with men, women with women, we would break off into groups of 4 to 6 people. What's talked about at that group stays with that group. It doesn't go away to anybody else. We need to learn to be the kind of person that we're actually looking for in others. And so when we can be that person with other people, then you start to determine what people could be that for you, and somebody's got to make the initial move. We're so anti-relationship, and a lot of people get relationship and drinking on Friday night mixed up.
Mm,
That's not really the same thing. Those are purely for other reasons. Sometimes it's for crying in your beer, and sometimes it's for other things. And then you go home and you think, I had a great time with the guys. What did you really talk about? What can you even remember? I'm not passing any judgment on anybody when I say that. I just know this to be the case because I've been a pastor for over 40 years and I've seen this kind of thing again and again and again. And so I always say it starts with you, be the kind of person that you're looking for, and then go find that one other person like that. And that's how you start to develop relationships that you can take to a new level, that you can say, this person is definitely on my 3 a.m. list. And don't abuse that 3 a.m. list. Use it if you need it.
absolutely, because at some point, we're all going to need it. Dr. John Deloney will be a guest. And one of the things that we talk about from his new book, which is Choosing to Live a Non-Anxious Life, is about community. And he says this in his book, and he puts it in bold, so I think he means it, Mark, that choosing to do life alone is choosing to die early. Choosing to do life alone is choosing to have an anxious life, and choosing to do life alone is a choice to take everyone around you down with you. He's talking about like your family and some of your friends. So we must choose connection, because when we're lonely, especially when we're surrounded by people who love us, we slowly drown our loved ones. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, he's
Wow.
serious about this. I know you're serious about this.
Man.
I'm serious about human connection as well. It is so, so very important. And to the point where you have a group that you have established that you are doing life with, that pack, so to speak, putting your actions where your mouth is.
And that group is called Pack Life Men. It's really a mastermind. And I think a lot of people get a mastermind, like what really is a mastermind? That's simply a group of people with similar goals and challenges who rely
Hmm.
on each other for accountability, advice, support, those kinds of things. We meet Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock Central, and there is a cost involved in it, but it's relatively minimal. And we find that as people have that kind of skin in the game, they show up, they talk,
Yeah.
they're more vulnerable. They're
Hmm.
realizing that I'm in this for a reason. And we collectively talk about life in general. I just asked the group last week, what else would you guys like from this? And they said, I like doing life this particular way. I love the accountability and the challenges that we've got. I don't want to do anything else. That's what we do. So we're finding huge value in that, and relatability. We got people from different parts of the country, and it's really, really marvelous to see these guys come together and to learn something new. All of us to learn something new. It's a mastermind. It's a collective. So if somebody's going through something, we might say, Travis, what do you think about this particular thing that Daniel's talking about, or that Joe's talking about, or Bill's talking about, and give their perspective on those kinds of things. And we meet for an hour and we're done. And it's something we all look forward to. It's really great. And I mean, over the years as a pastor, John, I've learned a lot about relationships and the benefit of those kinds of connections, and to meet somebody new. Like you and I met face to face, but this is how we've met since on
Right.
Zoom. But to be able to meet people like this, I think it's really something when we're able to meet together, learn how to overcome pride and anxiety, and there's a correlation between those two, by the way.
Mm.
Stress, toxic culture, and together we just kind of pursue that identity, that amazing identity that God has for us, and that's what we do. And I think because of the vulnerability of that group coming in and willing to learn, but also we don't come in with our cameras off. Nobody's allowed to come in with your camera off. You're not allowed to come in with your camera off to the Pack Life Men.
I understand.
We've got other things, but to this group, you got to come in there, be vulnerable, talk up. If you're struggling, we need to hear about it. Let's talk about it.
Hmm.
It stays right there. It's beautiful. It's really something. And I'm passionate about helping men be men in this mixed up world that we're in right now. Because society
I,
needs men to stand up.
I couldn't let you get away with saying that pride and anxiety are linked without letting you go on a little mini sermon about that, because that really makes me want to lean in and go,
So pride points to yourself, and anxiety is trying to, in many ways, trying to keep up with the identity that you're trying to portray to other people. So sometimes there's I'm better at something than I really am, and so suddenly, if I'm not, and it's becoming exposed, then a bit of anxiety comes with that. They're not directly linked, but there are many cases where pride and anxiety are linked. And then I think when we learn how to talk less and listen more, it helps our pride. But then as we start to listen more, we hear from other people, which also can feed into the getting rid of some of the anxiety, because you realize that the things you're going through are not unique to you. Nobody has gone through anything that's unique. I'm not saying people haven't gone through bad things. I've been through some sexual abuse as an 8-year-old. Nobody should have to go through that. It was a terrible thing, and I repressed the memories for 40 something years, and they were exposed 12, 13 years ago. And then it felt like it just happened to me as a 50-year-old man. And nobody should have to go through that, John. But I'm not the only 8-year-old that's ever been through that.
That's right.
I'm an 8-year-old. I'm a 64-year-old now that can help other people that have been through those things, because we live in a fallen world. When we say we don't need help, that's pride. And when we refuse that help, that also builds up the anxiety in our life. And then when you swallow your pride and say, I do need help, and you go get help, it reduces the anxiety. That's how I say they're linked.
That is so good. Mark, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. And that's going to help a lot of people. And it goes right along with what we're saying, man. We need other people. And a great place, you show off some of your connections that you've made over the years, both new people to your life and older people, is through your podcast, Grit and Glory, Songs and Stories. And I honestly believe this is one of the more unique podcasts out there. Just the way you set it up. Tell us a little bit about the premise of the show and how it goes.
Well, when we started the podcast, I was on a mastermind of sorts with some folks, and we were talking about music. And one of the guys said, Mark, I like music, okay, but what I really like is the stories behind the music. Why was that song written? Have you ever thought about a podcast? So I sought out a coach. His name is Eric Johnson. He's a podcast guru, and he really got me going on this. Matter of fact, I spent last week in Sarasota with him. I saw him several times, and he got me going on the podcast. And so it started one particular way, but really the way it's gone now is like when I had you on, I had you pick a song. I can't remember the song you picked, but I had you pick one of my songs. Why did you pick that song? And then I told a little bit about why I wrote it. Then we asked some questions. Now, the bigger part of the podcast for us, John, is to tell God's stories. And so I'll ask at the end of that podcast interview, John, would you tell us a God story? Now, everybody should have more than one. And there's those, as I call them, there's those walking on water God stories that everybody talks about, which is great and good. We should share those, because some of those miracles, people need to believe in those miracles, need to believe and see that God still is working to this day. So as people are sharing these things, again, no story is unique, John. Other people can relate to them. They're terrible. Some of the stories are really terrible, but they're not unique. They're not the only person that's dealt with alcoholism or methamphetamines or any of these particular things. They're not the only people that it's a terrible story, and it's a story of redemption. I was, again, talking to a guy this morning that is a changed man. He's just recently on my show, Scott Hume, and just a few years back, he was a mess, and I knew him then, and he tried to commit suicide, and he called me, and he said, Mark, thank God you answered the phone. Thank God you answered the phone. And I went down to the hospital, and we chatted for a bit. We prayed together. He is a change. He's a pastor today. And I mean, the life that has been changed from him is just, it's a God story. And how he got saved is a God story. They can check out the podcast. to hear his story. It's really, really amazing. But we like those walking on the water God stories. But we're also trying to get people looking for the God stories every day.
Yeah.
John, every day we wake up. I wrote a song called Savor the Flavor. Now, there's a story behind that, too. But my father-in-law, rest his soul, he lived here with us for 5.5 years as we took care of him in his last years. And he was from Georgia, and he had this beautiful Southern accent. And he saw me. I put hot sauce on everything. Everything. I'm just a hot sauce nut. And he looked at me one day. He said, "Mark, you should savor the flavor. Savor the flavor." So I wrote a song, not necessarily about that, but the title was really, really wonderful.
Every day there are God things that happen.
Right.
And we so often attribute it to luck or, just happenstance. No, it's a God thing.
That's right. And we need to look at those, savor the flavor. Oh, there's a line in there that says you got to do the work to make the pitch. That's where I was going with this. Do the work to make that pitch. People go, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And I said, every day you wake up, you're pitching something to somebody every day. Think about it. Think about it. Your relationship at your work, you're here I am. I'm here to do my job. I'm going to pitch myself to do my job today. I go into a coffee conversation this morning. I had to pitch some thoughts to Scott. I have to pitch myself to that in a conversation. There was a little God story moment this morning in talking with a guy named Kelvin. And I just met him there at the coffee shop. I said, "Are you a music guy?" After we'd had some conversation, he said, "Yep, I see your logo on your hat, I see your hat." I said, "Well, I'm a Jesus guy. I write and release Jesus music. Here's a card. Listen, let me know what you think." I'm making a pitch at that particular point. We're making pitches every day. I pitch myself to my wife every day. What can I do to make your life grand today? And her to me, and these kinds of things, to our kids, to our grandkids, to our church. If I lead worship, if I'm up there, in many ways, I'm making a pitch to the congregation, even though I'm serving an audience of one. I want the congregation to join in and to be part of that with me.
I love these different aspects of your life, whether it be the songwriting or the storytelling. We both got to hear somebody say that, stories are sticky. And I know that stuck with you along the way as well. And, and songs are sticky as well.
Yep.
So, and it's a lot of times, sometimes it's just the hook and sometimes it's what the song has to say. And I know for you, it's a lot of times what the song has to say. So I thank you so much for joining us on the show. And when people want to check you out, maybe get into community with you, where do we do that?
They go to Mark Alewine Music. That's going to be the easiest thing. All one word, of course. Mark with a K. Alewine, the two alcoholic beverages together. Mark Alewine Music at gmail.com. And right there on that webpage, Mark Alewine Music at gmail.com. You can kind of look around there. You've been part of what we do the third Thursday of the months usually. We call them the God Stories Call. And anybody can come to those things. And we just get on there and we tell those God stories. There's a link for that. There's a link for the Pack Life Men. If you're interested in that, we can have a conversation. That's one of those areas where we'll have a conversation before you actually join the group, because we want to make sure it's a good fit for both of us. And then our music and our podcast, it's all right there on the page, markalewinemusic.com. And we've just released our 30th song on all the streaming platforms. So if people listen to Amazon or Apple or Spotify or YouTube or whatever, we're there. And Mark Alewine Music. And if you've got a little follow button, we would appreciate that. That's a good thing to do. So that's how we're doing it. Written Glory Songs and Stories is also on that page. That's the podcast. Our podcasts are about 20-ish minutes long, give or take. That's how you get a hold of us.
That's awesome. Mark, thank you again for being on the show, buddy.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate running into you, and I appreciate your friendship, even so far in just these few months. Can't wait to see where it goes. And I'll be Hopefully I won't have to give you a 3 a.m. call, but I'll put you on my 3 a.m.
I'm
list,
on
okay?
there. Put me on there, and thank you for answering to the name David. I appreciate it. We're here today because of that.
Absolutely. No problem. I'll answer to anything.
Thanks, John.
Mark Alewine here on the Where You're Going podcast. And thank you so much to Mark for being part of the show today. You can find all of his links in the show notes for this show. And it's so fun to think that, our linkage just goes back to us being introduced by the wrong name a few months back. But he truly is a great soul and a great reminder that in this life we need other people to help strengthen us, pick us up when we can't necessarily do it just for ourselves. Remember, the Where You're Going podcast is wherever you get your podcasts. Rate and review the show. It helps us so much as we continue to get the word out. Thanks to everybody involved in this show. And remember that it's not about where you've been. It's not about where you are right now. It's about where you're going and who you're becoming. Talk to you next week.